In this section, we're going to look more at the vertical distances between notes. If you remember back to the graph we originally drew and we said the vertical axis represented high pitches or low pitches, we're now going to start quantifying those. Now, we did say that we had an octave, which is a real phenomenon, a phenomenon of nature, and we said that was 8 notes. Of course, it's actually 7 note names, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, back to A. But of course, if you look, for instance, at Zach's guitar here, you'll see that there aren't 7 notes, there's a lot more.
So we did an example where we said that the open A string is here, and then if you half that string, it's an octave above. But if we look at the discrete pitches available to us in between, we've actually got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then things start repeating again, actually. So what we're saying is the octave on many musical instruments nowadays isn't divided into 8, as you would expect, based on the prefix oct. Actually, we have 12 distinct pitch classes.
Yeah. Now, if we were to look at the piano, we will see the same thing again. So looking at what Zach just did on guitar, if we look at it on the piano, instead of having frets, of course, we've got all of these white notes, we've also got these black notes, which we're now going to introduce. So, starting on A, where Zach was, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then we're back to A. And there's our octave. Now, going back to this A, this distance here is called a semitone, where semi means half. So if that distance is called a semitone, this distance is called a tone. Semitone, half, double it, tone. That's the same on all instruments. Okay, keep that thought in mind. We're now going to have a look at that represented back on our stave. Now, this semitone is the smallest distance that we're going to work with at the moment. Now, if you want to find out more about that, we have additional material on it, but let's just say for the moment, the semitone is the smallest working distance we can have between 2 notes. Also, at this point, we're going to stop using A and start orientating ourselves around C. And so here is C on our stave. The next note up on the line is D. We can count from C to D, 1, 2. It's a tone. But if we're going to name it in a different way, we can say it is an interval of a second. 1, 2, a second. There are lots more intervals for us to look at, and to do that, we're actually going to go back to the keyboard.
So Richard's just talked to you about this interval of a second from C to D. But as you said, there are much more than that. So let's have another look through that. And we'll do that within the octave. So we've got C to D. That's a second. 1, 2. We've got C to E. 1, 2, 3. That's a third. C to F, a fourth. C to G, a fifth. C to A, a sixth. C to B, a seventh. And C to C, now we're not going to call that an eighth, we're going to use the word that we've already used, which is octave. But what we don't want you to think is that intervals are only ever counted from C. You know, we could go G to A is a second, G to C is a fourth, F to A is a third. It's all about counting the space. 1, 2, 3, F to A is a third. Now, if we were to play B to C, for example, we can see that this is a second. 1, 2. Okay, let's play F to G. F to G is a second. 1, 2. But actually what we see here is that the B to C is a second, but C is only a semitone above B. Whereas, for instance, F to G, 1, 2, is a second, but G is actually a tone that's to say 2 semitones above F. Now these are both seconds, and it's perfectly correct to describe them that way, but they do have a different quality. We're going to talk about that more next week, so hold that thought. But at the moment, let's use that information and turn to think about scales.
So now we're going to turn our attention to scales. There's one. Scales are a pathway through an octave. Okay? It's like they're a pool of notes, a set of notes which melodies can be drawn from. And if we can have that on the piano as well, I could say, if I was doing Julie Andrews, that is a do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But I can also say it is C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. That's why we've reorientated ourselves to C, because we've now found the scale of C major, which I'm sure you've heard of, and which is very common throughout the world. Similarities exist in many cultures, and it's what lots of music is built on, C major.
The important thing for you looking at this is when you're looking at your piano, it's all the white notes from C to C. So Richard just said that this is an example of a major scale. And actually what's important here is the relationship between the notes. The relationship between all these notes that are available to us within this pool of notes. And actually what we have to remember here is the difference between tones and semitones.
So let's look at them again on our stave. C to D. That's a tone, so I'm going to write T underneath here for tone. D to E, another tone, so here's a T. E to F, there's no black note in between, so this is a semitone, which I'll show with an S, S. F to G, a tone. G to A, a tone. A to B, a tone, and again B to C, a semitone. There's no black note in between. So that gives us a pattern of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone.
So this pattern of 2 tones and then a semitone, then 3 more tones and then a final semitone is what makes the scale sound the way it does. Now we could say that each note on its own doesn't actually mean that much. What's important is how they sound next to each other in the context, how they sound next to each other and build up relationships between one another. What this does is it gives us the flavour, it gives us the overall sound. And if we're going to talk about that formally in music theoretic terms, it gives us the quality of the scale. An important piece of terminology to remember then is that the letter name that the scale is named after is called the tonic. So, in the case of C major, C is the tonic. In the case of F major, F is the tonic.
This major scale is also an example of what's called a diatonic scale, dia between 2 tonics. Diatonic scales are ones where we always have 7 notes with some pattern of 5 tones and 2 semitones. Now, let's just have a little bit of this scale again on the stave. And remember we said C to D was a second. Zach had pointed out that B to C was also a second, but one of the smaller ones other than a semitone. So I'm going to put this little dart sign here to show that between B and C is a semitone. Now the other place we have a semitone is between E and F, so I'm also going to put the dart sign there. And that will just help us to see on the stave, our major scale, where the semitones are. So there you have it. We found C major. Through our pattern of tones and semitones, we found our first major scale. But of course, a scale isn't just a scale. A scale helps to make music. C major could give us this. Because we are in Scotland. C major can also give us this. And don't think I'm being patronizing playing Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. It's a good exemplifier of the major scale. It was a good enough tune for Mozart to write a whole set of variations on. And while I'm on Mozart, that brings me to a little disclaimer. In this course, we're dealing with musical techniques which are known as common practice. And the common practice era is basically Western Europe from 1600 to 1900. So it's very much the music of Bach, Haydn, Mozart, Beethoven, etc. There are other forms of music around the world that might use different techniques. Where possible, we will reference them, but it has to be said that the common practice is a good system to work from. It applies to quite a lot of pop and rock, a lot of jazz, quite a lot of folk music, and so that's our main focus in this course.